guilty, not guilty, 10
Charles
times.
Manson, described today by the star witness
Jury
again.
in the so-called Night Stalker case reached its verdict today.
Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of
The woman
murder.
suspected of shooting Selena is still holding police at
Music
bay.
producer Phil Spector was convicted
In
Monday.
Los Angeles, a killer the police are calling the Hillside Strangler.
Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes.
Welcome to another episode of LA Legal. I'm Neama Rahmani, sitting in for Liana. I'm honored to have my very good friend, Matthew Barhoma, Barhoma Law, here with me. We're going to be talking about Tom Girardi and his wife, Erika. Matthew, of course, is an criminal appellate expert. So, I don't know. We'll be talking about some potential criminal charges. We got conservatorships, obviously a lot of civil litigation, bankruptcy. There's a lot going on in a case that's really made for reality TV. So let's get started. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right. So let's just jump to it. So Tom and Erika Girardi were living the perfect LA dream life. From the rom-com way they first met to the lavish lifestyle they kept up. But all dreams must come to an end. In a span of 3 years, the public watched their luxury lifestyle unravel through their marriage, spiraling reputation, and tumultuous legal battles. Tom Girardi was born in 1939 and graduated from Loyola High, Loyola Marymount, and got his JD from Loyola, triple Loyola there, in 1961. He is a former attorney, we'll be talking about that, and co-founder of Girardi and Keese, a now dismantled law firm here in downtown LA. Erika Girardi was born in 1971 and went to North Atlanta High, and at the age of 18 moved to New York City until she eventually made her way to LA. She was an aspiring actress and singer and rose to fame in the reality show we all know, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Tom and Erika met when Erika was waitressing at an LA restaurant called Chasen's, which Tom frequented. At the time, Erika had gone through a divorce of her own, while Tom had gone through 2 divorces, and they stated that they were not looking for anything. But they moved in together and married in 1999. In 2015, Erika's dream of becoming a celebrity came true, and she joined the show, The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Tom was not featured on the show very often, which caused the public to speculate about their relationship. In 2020, Erika filed for divorce from her husband of 21 years and asked to be paid spousal support. Tom responded requesting that the court not provide spousal support for Erika. After about a month of the news of their divorce, both Erika and Tom got sued for allegedly using their split to embezzle money. So, let's just kind of jump to it. As lawyers, Tom Girardi, especially in LA, I mean, he was an icon. I mean, they called him the kingmaker. Like, if he wanted to be appointed to the bench, he had to get Tom Girardi's stamp of approval. So, Matthew, just kind of coming up, you know, it's really a huge fall from grace for Tom Girardi. What were your initial thoughts of Girardi and Keese, obviously before all of this happened?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And the thing is, like, this is a very local, I mean, think about the local impact of this guy, right? The triple Loyola guy, right? And I knew of Tom and Tom, his existence, knew of him growing up and seeing, a number of things about him. But ultimately, some articles came out and it was baffling, right? That kind of ensued a lot of speculation, and honestly, it's quite baffling. You don't think that someone of his stature, of what he's been able to accomplish, the verdicts that he's been able to get, ends up with allegations of this sort.
Oh yeah, I mean, it just really probably the last person anyone would suspect. I mean, going back, I mean, they made movies about this guy, Aaron Brockovich, right? It was based on one of his cases. He was by far and away, probably the most prominent plaintiff's lawyer in the country, I would say, or certainly, if not the most, one of the most. And here in LA, I remember for a while when I was at Old Melvin Myers, I literally worked across the street from their office here on Wilshire downtown. And I mean, they had a compound. I mean, anyone who was anyone in the plaintiff's world wanted to work with or for Tom Girardi.
It's very true. Actually, a lot of attorneys really wanted to go work there. There's a ton of you hear a lot of it about attorneys that wanted to go work at his firm, wanted to maybe get hired under him, and just the cases, the opportunity he was presented is also immense, right? I think that a lot of clients really wanted Tom on their cases, right? I think the most catastrophic cases said, we're going to go get Girardi, right? That was like a thing. So ultimately, this is a guy who is a who's who when it came to, the industry, into the plaintiff consumer world, and most importantly, in LA legal.
Oh, yeah, no question. So behind the scenes, of course, there were a lot of state bar complaints. Lawsuits against Girardi and his firm for really stealing client funds and not paying their debts. What I can't still understand is how this was all kept a secret for so many years. We're talking about decades worth of litigation and state bar complaints. So let's just start with the state bar, because I gotta say, folks there were either asleep at the switch at best, or on the take at worst.
Yeah. No, that's true. And, so here's the thing. You're talking about a very public figure, right? And maybe some of the worst things that you could do as an attorney, right? Misappropriation of funds is like, it's that one thing as an attorney. There generally, there's just no getting around it, right? The bar will come for your neck. Clients will come for your neck, right? So ultimately, misappropriation of funds, it's one of those things, even dating back to law school, you hear many cases, many instances, going into the bar, passing the bar, becoming an attorney. You hear many instances of how that's like the one thing, it's flagrant not to do. So for it not to come out for as long as it did, and actually for us to get information the way that we did, I agree with you. It's a little suspect. It is, there's got to be a rise to a question there. How did this remain under wraps, right? How did this remain from becoming bigger than it was? And even now that I'm kind of reading back the facts, looking back at some things, I almost kind of feel confused about the timeline. When did this happen? How did this occur, right? But that's because it's all compiled all too much.
Yeah, so much to unravel. And just like Matthew said, I mean, when you're in law school, you got to take that professional responsibility class. You take the MPRE. Really, it's the cardinal sin, the capital offense. Do not steal client funds. You can, be DUI, and, there's judges that have multiple DUIs. You can have a drug problem. You can have sex with your clients. You can do all these things. Yeah. Don't steal money from your clients. And obviously, you're not supposed to do any of those things. But really, it's the number one way. You get suspended, you get disbarred. It's do not pass go straight to jail. Yeah. But Tom apparently has relationships with some pretty high-level folks, including investigators at the state bar. He's whining and dining them. So I don't know what happens. You make a complaint about Tom Girardi and it just goes in the trash can. So really, I got to give credit to, the Los Angeles Times. They're the ones who really kind of pushed this story. They broke this. Actually, as we speak, they're in litigation against the state bar. They filed a lawsuit to get all these complaints disclosed because the bar still is resisting. I mean, they finally relented from giving the media and the public this information for us to really finally understand how botched or how much of a cover-up this really was.
Yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, the bar is there as a consumer protection asset, right? It protects consumers from people quite like Mr. Girardi, right? And with that being said, you'd think that all of these bar grievances, they would come to light. They are a matter of public knowledge sometimes. And actually, when there is an official finding, it's posted online. So for there to be litigation, for you to be able to subpoena these items, for you to be able to understand a track record of it, makes a lot of sense. But the LA Times article, I thought, was a bombshell, right? It blew the lid off. It almost felt like it was the whistleblower, right? It was the item that kind of raised questions everywhere. And so, I think that there's a lot more to come, even given where his current state is. I think that a lot of the litigation currently is based on information and belief. And I'm interested to see what comes next, right? There's been some depositions, there's been some items here and there, but ultimately, I think that the evidentiary weight of this is probably a lot deeper than what we think it is.
Oh, I'm sure it's just the beginning, right? And there's other folks that are going to be implicated. I mean, the question is, will Girardi ever be brought to justice? I mean, we'll talk about that, but I mean, I got to tip my hat to the LA Times. They really sort of uncovered this scandal in a way that the state bar, and let's talk about the state bar for a couple minutes. You know, again, don't come after me, but I just really want to kind of tell the truth. You know, the state bar recently, they've been criticized by a lot of folks, myself included. They're trying to expand access to justice. I get it. But they're trying to have these paraprofessionals, folks that aren't licensed, you know, to do some quasi-legal work. And I'm thinking like, yo, you're supposed to like regulate the people that, you know, are already members of the bar. You're not doing a good job, you know. In any industry, right? Obviously, I do personal injury. I do employment. There's runners. There's cappers. There's all sorts of stuff going on. You obviously got people stealing client money. And instead of regulating the people that you're already not regulating, you want to expand access and have all these other folks who are providing legal services. I think that's a problem.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of room for error there. I mean, so the thing is, every practitioner, they worry about their license, right? At the end of the day, their license is a linchpin, right? It's something that if they want to continue to do this profession, they got to operate correctly. Now, if you expand that, right, where is the regulation, or how is the regulation going to play out? What kind of protection are you going to be able to afford individuals, especially consumers? If you think about the consumer world, I mean, you know, you talk about it all the time. I mean, you know, these are the people that you essentially give almost what feels like big law experience to, right? They're the little guy. They're the ones who need protection the most. So, but I am interested though. What do you think is the drawing point? I mean, are they expanding it to people who are maybe quasi legally trained? What do you think about that?
Yeah. So. The California state legislature, they basically pulled the plug on this initiative because it was happening at the same time as the Girardi scandal. And they said, listen, like, state bar, stay in your lane, do your job. Don't look, I get it. Like, people should have access to legal services. But certainly in Girardi's world, you know, there's no shortage of personal injury lawyers. I mean, you know, after the billboards you see. Also, I don't think we need any more of those. Look, maybe there's some areas you know, where maybe some access could be expanded. But, you know, in really kind of critical areas, I think, like employment, personal injury, there's contingency fee work. Obviously, you can get a public defender. In dependency cases, they're going to take your kids away for you. The court will appoint a lawyer for you. So I'm sort of curious to know where the need is. And I think some of the ways you can kind of expand access, maybe have some attorney fees or fee shifting provisions to kind of encourage people to go in that area, as opposed to having non-lawyers. Let's be honest, there's a lot of bad lawyers out there.
As is already. As is already. I mean, people that are already, you know, under this regulation that maybe are questionable. I mean, you see there's also people who abuse it, you know, quite well, like Tom Girardi, like maybe someone like Evan Netty, right?
Yeah, Naughty, man. Look, I mean, the guy was like considered to be like a potential nominee for president, right? You know?
Right.
And then lo and behold, he's just ripping clients off, and now he's an extortionist, convicted felon. So yeah, Avenatti, Michael, another person doing time. Now Girardi is not doing time. So let's talk about criminal charges or lack thereof. I want to talk about his conservatorship. I want to talk about the divorce. I want to talk about bankruptcy. I want to talk about civil litigation. This guy covers it all. So we're going to hit all the different areas of the law here today. But let's talk about it. So initially the state bar suspends him. Finally they disbar him, but he basically doesn't put up any fight. So like administratively, Tom Girardi is no longer practicing law. Finally, maybe better late than never. State bar, I guess, I don't want to say does its job, but disbars him. So let's move on from the state. Well, let's talk about potential criminal charges, because I think it was a federal judge that initially referred this case.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a state bar referral or prosecution, but there has been no criminal prosecution of Tom Girardi.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's not to say that it's not to come, but there's a couple of major things, I think, that maybe come before any kind of criminal proceedings here, at least in a situation like this. For instance, there's the bankruptcy proceeding, and there's also making the victims whole, right? I mean, those individuals, you know, they need their payouts, right? Rightfully so, especially if they have to live with lifelong surgery, right? Another is there's the divorce proceeding that almost kind of seems to be entangled with this bankruptcy proceeding, right? There's a number of lawsuits already pending. Now, I think if you're going to talk about the criminal sector, maybe you wait until all of that pans out a little bit, weighs out a little bit. But the problem is going to be his mental capacity. We already have mental capacity issues with him here, right? He's already in conservatorship. He is diagnosed with, Alzheimer's, or so allegedly. So with that being said, is he going to be competent? Is he going to be fit to undergo any kind of criminal proceedings, which I think is going to be an even higher burden given his age, given where he's at. Do I think that criminal charges should absolutely come down? 100%. There should be at some point, when the weight of the evidence is heavy enough, there should be some charges. I think it actually is maybe good for society as a whole to show an example, to say, listen, no matter what, we will vindicate for a right like this, even in the criminal sector.
I agree, and you brought up Avenatti, a great example. I mean, kind of similar case, around the same time. He's prosecuted by the Department of Justice in New York. He's prosecuted by the Department of Justice here in the Central District, Orange County, and he's in federal prison. Oh, and I think he's prosecuted by the Department of Justice here in LA as well. So multiple cases going on. So here's someone that's going to federal prison for quite some time. Tom Girardi, of course, no charges filed. Matthew, obviously, you brought up a good point. He is now under a permanent conservatorship, reportedly has Alzheimer's. So, from a legal perspective, the question is he competent to stand trial? Right. Can he assist in his own defense? I know you know that issue probably pretty well.
Yeah.
Do you think that is the reason he hasn't been charged, or do you think it's just more?
I know, when it comes to Girardi, you see all kinds of just strange things, right? Like, look at how the bar has treated it. Look at how, how the lawsuit, the divorce is being treated, how the bankruptcy proceedings are being treated, right? Nothing here is normal, right? I think that criminal charges on anyone else would have came down a long time ago, right? Hence Evanetti, right? Someone like Evanetti who was threatening the president, right? Stealing money, just like Tom Girardi, maybe in a different MO, and we got to talk about that, Girardi's MO, but nothing has been in the norm for him. I don't think it's solely just his mental capacity. I think that there might be more there. Maybe prosecutors are really waiting. I mean, a guy like Girardi, if you're going to come, you got to come correct.
Yeah, I guess there's white privilege, and then there's Girardi privilege, The guy's like bulletproof,
Yeah.
So, and look, maybe some of these tactics are defensive tactics. I wouldn't be surprised they got him in a conservatorship, Alzheimer's, to kind of protect him. Obviously, you have the preemptive bankruptcy. Even the divorce, some people think it's a sham to kind of protect half the assets. And we haven't really talked about Erika Jayne. I know there's probably a lot of fans out there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about her. I think before all this, people thought that she was potentially. And again, I'm not saying I agree with it, but at least on the show and everything, people say, "Listen, well, where is this old guy? He's not on the show. You got this gold digger. You got this scammer." But I find it ironic that at least it turns out, and again, I don't know what, if anything, Erika knew, but we know that Tom Girardi's a scammer.
Yeah.
What, if anything, do you think Erika Jayne knew?
That's the magic question, right? How bona fide is Erika Jayne, right? Are you bona fide or not? And I have my suspicions here, okay? I'll tell you why. I want to give her the benefit of the doubt, right? She's not an attorney.
Yeah.
She didn't work necessarily, although she got paid from the firm, right? She didn't work there. The reason I have my suspicions, though, is you'd think that in a legal dispute of this sort, you wouldn't be on the show.
Yeah.
But she still went on the show. And when she did, it seemed like she was controlling the narrative. Smart if you're not a layperson, right? Usually the advice is, hey, be quiet, right? Let your lawyers handle it. This seemed like quite the opposite with Erika, right? It was go on the show and control the narrative, right? And to me, okay, fine, control the narrative. We're going to hear the narrative, and it makes me curious, how lay are you? I don't think you're that lay. I think you're very knowledgeable. Actually, even at some point, she threatens her co-stars that if they lie on her name, she's going to come for them. Which, AKA, they really understood as defamation, right? They understood that as slander. Like these are very much sophisticated individuals. I wouldn't say they're fully lay. I would say that by virtue of the years that she's worked alongside Girardi, I wonder how much you know.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I mean, so just to kind of back up, the controversy arose because she files for this divorce, right? Preemptively. And we know that divorces, at least here in California, more than 70% of the time, they're initiated by women. But, you know, there was some issue of spousal support, whether she did, but it was really someone like Girardi essentially rolled over, gave over half the estate, half of the community property, right? So all of a sudden, half of the assets are protected, right? Because they're Erika Jane's. Creditors can't go after them. Even you kind of this very interesting intersection between family law and bankruptcy, right? Because Girardi files for bankruptcy, but Erika does not. So all of a sudden, half the money is with Erika Jane. And that's setting aside, obviously, all the controversy about the jewelry and gifts. And, I mean, obviously, she wasn't the only one getting gifts. And,
Right.
You know, so.
Right. Well, that's true. I mean, that you know, there's a whole lot there. But, you know, the divorce, I think the timeline of the divorce is just questionable. And if you think about it, sometimes if you're really sophisticated, if you're Tom Girardi sophisticated, you could use divorce proceedings to avoid all kinds of financial issues, right? It could be a decoy to move funds, could be a decoy to move title to property, right? So, you know, and not only that, I think that how early they started, especially given how close all the other proceedings are, it just raises suspicions. Now, I don't know if that's enough to point the finger and say, aha, this is definitely a sham, right? I wish that actually more of the pleadings that existed out there, the lawsuits as they existed, weren't so much on information and belief, were actually based on a little bit more. But I mean, how do you allege that? How do you prove that until you get further in discovery and find out more? And that's why I think that there's going to be a lot more when it comes to their divorce. There's going to be a lot more when it comes to their bankruptcy. And I think that there are going to be looming questions about how bona fide are you? We already know she had to give back the earrings, right?
Sure, yeah.
So maybe it wasn't bona fide there, or maybe we're able to trace the funds there. But I think there's more to that, you know, to that pot.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, you have divorce here used as, you know, in some ways, potentially money laundering scheme, an asset protection plan, whatever the case may be. Certainly not your typical Hollywood divorce. Let's talk before we go to the bankruptcy proceedings. Let's talk a little about, you alluded to Girardi's MO, right?
Yeah.
How is he stealing these client funds? Let's talk about it.
I was always curious, right? Like, how do you do it? Do you put the money in the trust account and then take it, right? Because you get a settlement check, right? You got the burn victim settlement check, right? You put it in your trust account, and then do you transfer it to your own account? Well, that's traceable, right? So he didn't do that. He didn't put the money directly in his account and just not give it. He didn't do that either. What I think he did, and what's alleged out there, I think is even worse, which is that he turned around and then entered into a separate agreement with these clients. And the things that he would lead them down, you know, the things that he would tell them is like, oh, the judge wants you to have it incremental. It's like, wait, what judge, right? Like there is no judge at this junction. Or he'll say things like, I want what's best for you, which as an attorney is something that it's a part of your fiduciary duty, right? But more importantly, you know, he'd say, I want what's best for you. And then he would give them incremental funds, but not enough. So the MO, I think, proves a lot of malice. You went out, you thought about how to enter into this agreement. You thought about the legality of it. You figured out loopholes into it. You've made it adhere to the code because you can enter into a transaction with a client if you cover the red tape, if you go around the right, you know, procedure. But this was all bad, right? The victims actually just ended up with all the harm. So I think the MO is just bludgeoning, right? Yeah.
No, it was bad. It was bad. I think in some instances, Girardi did a decent job of covering it up, but in some instances, not so good. Like, money's and gifts paid from the trust account, client trust account, to, let's call it his friend, let's call it his side chick. What do you want to call it, Matthew?
Well, the L.A. Article Times, calls it Judge Bigelow, and so he's made transactions there that we know of, and the problem is, I think he got desensitized, probably. That's what my assumption is. My gut tells me he got desensitized. He's just at a point where he's just shelling it out, right? He's just whatever account, right? So he's taken some steps to protect himself there, but protect yourself from what, really? A wrongdoing.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Judge Bigelow apparently had some sort of relationship with Girardi. She, I think, was also in the Court of Appeal. I don't know if you ever dealt with her.
She's a justice. I never dealt with her. Never dealt with her.
Was in the Court of Appeal. I think she's retired now, maybe mediator, probably not mediating too much anymore. But I think she got a down payment for a condo from Girardi, a bunch of other gifts. Yeah. So
can I tell you something though? She wrote the book on some criminal procedural stuff in California. I mean, she taught a lot. Her legal work in and of itself. I mean, it's a body of work. It's a whole thing. But the implications, I think, are quite bizarre. Now, with that being said, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I read somewhere she made right with the bankruptcy proceedings, and they, I believe, are not pursuing anything.
Yeah, I think she did give whatever she received back. Certainly a stain on her reputation just being associated with Girardi. Again, I think her position was, well, I didn't know the source of the funds. I don't have access to Girardi's trust account and that type of thing. But it's unclear, again, if any of the checks that went to her did say Girardi and Keith's client trust account. Right. Just don't know. There's some allegations out there. We haven't talked about the bankruptcy too much, but let's talk about that a bit. Obviously, there's a lot of creditors,
Yeah.
And all the assets go into the bankruptcy proceeding in the estate. You got a trustee here. They recently auctioned off their Pasadena home. Obviously we've talked about the jewelry, and all these sort of items of art and sports memorabilia, and it's got a lot of media attention, both traditional and social media, but it's certainly nowhere near enough to pay all these clients and all these creditors, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was reading somewhere they had an auction that ended up with like pennies. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars versus the millions that are owed. I also watched a deposition from him from those proceedings. It was a videotape deposition from his property. And he was attesting to how, that he had $50 million laying around in cash, and that's all gone. He estimated it to be $50 to $80 million. So, I mean, money was sitting around, and this guy was just plowing through it. And so, ultimately, I think...
where did it go? I mean, is this guy popping bottles? Is Erika blowing the money?
I mean, there's a $20,000 transaction to EJ Global, right? Erika Jane Global. So, I mean, maybe we could trace some of the money, but I mean, if I was to, have my bets, I would say that he probably blew it. I mean, at some point, the guy had 2 jets. That's not cheap. And he lived this life that was over the top, right? And so I think that a lot of the money's probably gone. Whatever's left of it, I think, is going to be nominal in consideration. But I believe there may be some other way for these victims to collect. Isn't there like a fund out there for individuals like them? I believe that there is. There might be like some public kind of fund.
Yeah, California obviously has like the victim compensation fund and those types of things. But I think you're talking about pennies on the dollar. I think whether it's the bankruptcy proceedings, any type of administrative fund, or the civil litigation, which there's lots of folks that file lawsuits, everything from vendors to clients to other law firms. I mean, he co-counseled a lot of firms. He never paid them. So, a lot of cases pending. But again, we talked about Alex Jones. He just got hit with a $1 billion judgment. I don't think Alex Jones is, anywhere near $1 billion to pay. So, it doesn't matter what kind of judgment you get. We know on the civil side, you got to collect it. So, do you think that'll ever happen?
Well, it's hard to say. I think the more that you can pin Erika Jane the more that you may be able to collect in the future. She's been dismissed from some lawsuits, not too long ago, the last couple months, from a personal perspective. Yeah. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, she's still on the hook in at least a professional capacity, right? I saw her touting, she's dismissed, but dismissed in what capacity, right? Because there's more to it. I think the more that you could pin Erika Jayne, could tie it in, the more that maybe these victims will have an ability to collect.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's difficult because it is possible. It is likely she's bona fide in some respects, right? She didn't know how these, what if it was rightful money that she was being paid? That's the assumption she was under, much like Bigelow. Yeah. Bigelow's like, well, I don't know the source of these funds. So I think that time is to tell, but pennies on the dollar, I think, is the message for these victims.
I agree. So just to follow up on that, so Erika Jayne has been sued personally, right? The allegations are fraud. You knew what was going on. You're in cahoots with your husband. Well, she and her lawyers filed summary judgment motions, and she's gotten dismissed, at least personally. She's gotten out of these cases. So as far as holding her personally responsible, so far that hasn't happened yet. So that really closes at least one door of recovery for the victims.
Yeah.
So kind of like, let's do some final takeaways, right? I mean, kind of do a post-mortem here. This is such a black eye for the state bar, the legal profession, personal injury lawyers like myself. People already think we're scum. And then if, the most prominent personal injury lawyer, plays into that stereotype, what, if anything, can be done going forward? We talked about all the mistakes that were made.
That's the part that sits with me the most, Neama, which is like guys like Evanetti, guys like Girardi, right? These guys have totally abused their license. I mean, they're a rogue version of what an attorney really ought to be, but they define a lot of the rep that we get, right? Personal injury lawyers, you hear about it all the time. They're just money hungry, things of this sort. But it's funny. I deal with a lot of attorneys day in and day out that are really rightful to the profession. I think the biggest takeaway, and maybe we're undergoing it even, is I believe the state bar is kind of tightening up, right? Is getting a little bit more serious about some of these allegations. I think that with the rise of the facts of what occurred with Bigelow, we're seeing probably tightening regulations there. I think we could avoid the next Girardi, right? There are many signs along the way that's there, right? So it's easy to be able to avoid the next Girardi, but it's going to happen, right? Money's money, greed is greed. And this lifestyle that we're so looking to emulate all the time is not going anywhere. If anything, it's made bigger. And so I think that there are going to be more precautions, more procedural safeguards, as there should be. But how do you make it go away for good? That's maybe never going to happen. We're never going to achieve that world.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, greed doesn't matter where you are, legal profession, any other profession. It's such a huge problem, especially with social media, right? I mean, a lot of this was just trying to flex on the gram. So,
yeah.
Well, Matthew, thanks so much for joining us. Really such an interesting case because it touches upon so many different areas on the law and social media and reality TV. So thanks for coming, and thank you all for watching another episode of LA Legal. See you guys soon.